Poor single dad invites a beggar home, unaware she's a secret billionaire looking for love. He barely has enough to feed his own daughter, yet he opens his door to a stranger in need. But what he doesn't know, she's not just seeking shelter, she's searching for something money can't buy. And when her secret is exposed, will their newfound connection survive? Or was it all a lie? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The howl of the winter wind rattled the windows of Arthur Reed's apartment as he stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing away at the remnants of dinner. Outside, snow fell in thick, angry swirls, piling against the building and transforming the city into a white wasteland. His calloused hands, marked by years of carpentry work, moved mechanically through the familiar motions of washing dishes while his mind tallied up bills and upcoming expenses. "Dad?" Lily's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Can you check my math homework?" Arthur turned, drying his hands on a threadbare towel, and smiled at his daughter. At 10 years old, Lily Reed was the spitting image of her mother. Same wavy brown hair, same bright hazel eyes that seemed to take in everything. The sight of her still caught in his chest sometimes, a bittersweet reminder of what they'd lost 3 years ago. "Sure thing, kiddo. Let me finish these dishes first." Lily nodded and returned to the small dining table that doubled as her homework station. Arthur watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with love and pride. Despite everything, despite losing her mother at such a young age, despite their financial struggles, Lily remained a sweet, thoughtful child. She deserved better than their cramped 2-bedroom apartment with its temperamental heating and leaky faucets, but it was the best he could manage on a carpenter's salary. The wind howled again, and Arthur shivered. The storm had worsened throughout the evening, and tomorrow's construction job would likely be canceled. Another day without pay they couldn't afford to lose. A sharp knock at the window startled both of them. Just the wind, Arthur thought, until he heard it again. Not at the window, but at the building's front entrance 3 floors below. "What was that?" Lily asked, looking up from her homework. "Probably just the storm," Arthur replied, but a nagging feeling pulled him toward the apartment window that overlooked the building's entrance. Peering down through the snow-streaked glass, he spotted a figure huddled in the doorway below. A person pressed against the door, seeking shelter from the merciless storm. Arthur squinted. A woman, it seemed, with nothing but a thin coat pulled tight around her shoulders. "Dad? What is it?" Lily had joined him at the window. Someone stuck outside in the storm. Arthur chewed his lower lip, indecision gripping him for only a moment before his conscience won out. "I'm going to check on them. Can I come?" "No, honey. Stay here where it's warm. I'll be right back." Arthur grabbed his coat from the hook by the door and made his way down the 3 flights of stairs. The building's entrance was poorly insulated, and he could feel the cold seeping through before he even opened the inner door. When he pulled it open, he found her, a woman with auburn hair peeking out from beneath a worn hood, her face pale from cold, her body trembling as she huddled against the glass door. "Hey," Arthur called, opening the outer door. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, startled. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was something striking about her. High cheekbones, piercing blue-green eyes that seemed almost luminous in the dim light. "I'm fine," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her shivering. "Just waiting out the worst of the storm." Arthur glanced at the white chaos beyond the doorway. "This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. You'll freeze out here." The woman hesitated, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "I don't want to impose." "It's no imposition to keep someone from freezing to death," Arthur said, a small smile softening his words. "I've got a warm apartment upstairs. Nothing fancy, but there's hot coffee and a couch." She studied him, those remarkable eyes seeming to look straight through him, assessing. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." That's very kind. I'm Arthur, Arthur Reed. Charlotte, she replied after a slight pause. Just Charlotte. No last name offered. As Arthur led her up the stairs, he couldn't help noticing the grace with which she moved despite her obvious exhaustion. There was something almost incongruous about it, like finding an orchid growing in a vacant lot. "Dad," Lily called as they entered the apartment. Her eyes widened at the sight of their unexpected guest. "Lily, this is Charlotte. She's going to warm up here until the storm passes." Arthur helped Charlotte remove her snow-dusted coat, revealing clothes that, while not expensive, seemed oddly out of place for someone he'd assumed was homeless. "Hello, Lily," Charlotte said, a genuine smile warming her face. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "We were just doing math homework," Lily replied, curiosity evident in her voice. "Math was always my favorite subject," Charlotte said, and something in her tone made Arthur look at her more closely. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that he had just invited Charlotte Blackwood, billionaire heiress to the Blackwood real estate empire, into his modest home. And with that simple act of compassion, the lives of everyone in that small apartment had just changed forever. Days have passed after the incident, and Charlotte stayed with Arthur and Lily for a while. Charlotte couldn't remember the last time she'd prepared a meal for anyone, let alone in a kitchen as modest as the Reeds. The cabinets were worn, the countertop chipped in places, but there was something undeniably charming about the space, perhaps because it felt lived in, genuine. "Are you sure you don't mind staying with Lily while I finish this job?" Arthur asked, shrugging into his work jacket. It had been 3 days since the storm, and Charlotte had found herself inventing reasons to stay. "Not at all," she replied, stirring the pot of homemade soup. "I need time to look for work anyway. The least I can do is help out while I'm here." Arthur hesitated at the door, studying her with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "You're good with her. Better than the neighbor who usually watches her." "She makes it easy," Charlotte said honestly. "She's a remarkable girl." After Arthur left, Charlotte served Lily a bowl of soup, watching with satisfaction as the girl's eyes widened at the first spoonful. "This is amazing," Lily said. "How did you learn to cook like this?" Charlotte nearly mentioned her private chef who'd taught her the basics during a summer in France, but caught herself. "My mother," she lied smoothly. She believed everyone should know how to make at least one perfect dish. Later, while helping Lily with her math homework, Charlotte's phone buzzed. She glanced at it discreetly, a message from her assistant, reminding her of tomorrow's board meeting. "Is that your family?" Lily asked. Charlotte slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Just a friend checking in." "Don't you miss them? Your family?" The innocent question landed like a stone in Charlotte's chest. "I don't have much family left," she admitted, which wasn't entirely untrue. Her parents had died years ago, leaving her the Blackwood Empire and very little else. "Me neither," Lily said quietly. "Just Dad." Charlotte hesitated, then asked, "Would you tell me about your mom?" "If you want to." Something in Lily's expression softened. She had the best laugh. "Dad says I have her smile." She reached for a framed photo on the bookshelf and handed it to Charlotte. The woman in the photo had Lily's same warm eyes and gentle smile. "She was beautiful," Charlotte said. "Dad doesn't talk about her much. I think it makes him too sad." "Sometimes the people we love the most are the hardest to talk about when they're gone," Charlotte said, surprising herself with her candor. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Charlotte found herself sitting at the kitchen table with Arthur, sharing a cup of tea. These late-night conversations had become a ritual, neither acknowledged, but both anticipated. "Lily told me about her mother today," Charlotte said. Arthur's hands tightened around his mug. "Did she?" "She has her smile." A sad smile crossed his face. "Yeah, she does." "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "No," he said quickly. "It's good for her to talk about Sarah. I probably don't encourage it enough. Grief doesn't follow a timetable, Charlotte said, thinking of her own parents. Arthur looked at her curiously. You sound like you know something about that. I've had my share of loss, she admitted. They talked until the tea grew cold, about grief and healing, about dreams deferred but not abandoned. Arthur spoke of the custom furniture business he'd hoped to start before Sarah's medical bills changed everything. Charlotte listened, struck by his resilience and lack of bitterness. What about you? He asked. What did you want to be before? He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with referencing her apparent homelessness. Before life took an unexpected turn, she supplied with a small smile. I wanted to make a difference, build something meaningful. It wasn't a lie. Behind the wealth and privilege, that desire had always been genuine. Days turned into a week. Charlotte continued her charade, making excuses to stay while secretly managing her company through terse emails and brief phone calls made from the building's stairwell. The deception weighed on her, but the warmth of the Reed household, something her penthouse had never provided, kept her tethered. She cooked dinners that brought genuine joy to Lily's face. The apartment filled with laughter that Arthur confessed had been absent for years. She helped Lily create a science project that earned an A+, the girl's excitement more rewarding than any business deal Charlotte had ever closed. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, their hands brushed beneath the soapy water. Instead of pulling away, they both paused, the contact sending an unexpected current between them. Charlotte looked up to find Arthur watching her, his expression a mixture of confusion and something deeper, more primal. Charlotte, he began, his voice low. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then, slowly, deliberately, his fingers entwined with hers beneath the water. Charlotte felt her breath catch. This wasn't part of her plan. This man with his integrity and gentle strength was never supposed to matter. Yet somehow, in this small kitchen with its chipped countertops and second-hand appliances, something authentic had taken root, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Charlotte found herself falling into an easy rhythm with the Reed family. Each morning, she'd help Lily pack her school lunch while Arthur rushed to get ready for work. The simple domesticity of it all filled a void she hadn't known existed in her life. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Arthur couldn't help but notice the change in his daughter. Lily was animated, talking about her day at school with an enthusiasm he hadn't seen in years. And then, in art class, Lily bubbled. Charlotte helped me with my drawing technique last night, so I knew exactly how to shade the trees. Arthur watched Charlotte beam at his daughter, his heart warming at the sight. You've been such a blessing, he said softly to Charlotte. I haven't seen her this happy in a long time. But their peaceful routine was shattered the next morning when Vernon Crane, the building's landlord, called an emergency tenant meeting in the lobby. His smug expression sent chills down Arthur's spine before he even opened his mouth. Due to necessary renovations and market adjustments, Crane announced, his voice dripping with false sympathy, rent will be increasing by 60% next month. The lobby erupted in protests. Mrs. Chen, who'd lived there for 20 years, burst into tears. The Rodriguez family held each other, looking shell-shocked. This is impossible. Arthur stepped forward. None of us can afford that kind of increase. Where are we supposed to go? Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. The market is what it is. Blackwood Properties has plans for this building that will better serve the community. Charlotte, standing at the back of the crowd, felt the blood drain from her face. Blackwood Properties, her company, her family's legacy was behind this cruel displacement of families. She watched Arthur's shoulders slump as he processed what this meant for him and Lily. That night, after Lily was asleep, Charlotte found Arthur at the kitchen table, surrounded by rental listings and budget calculations. Her stomach churned with guilt as she watched him run his fingers through his hair in frustration. Everything in our price range is so far from Lily's school, he muttered. She'd have to leave her friends, start over somewhere new. After losing her mom, this building, these neighbors, they're her stability. Charlotte's hands shook as she made them both tea. She could stop this with one phone call. She could reveal herself as Charlotte Blackwood and halt the entire process. But the thought of Arthur looking at her with betrayal, of losing the genuine connection they'd built, made her chest tight with fear. "There has to be a way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been saving for my own furniture business," Arthur said, pushing aside a stack of papers. "I thought maybe this year, but now that'll have to go toward moving costs." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm sorry. I know this affects you too. You're welcome to come with us, wherever we end up." His kindness, even in the midst of his own crisis, made Charlotte's guilt even heavier. She watched him return to his calculations, each worried frown feeling like an accusation. She had the power to help, but using it would mean destroying the most real relationship she'd ever had. One Saturday afternoon, Arthur paced the community room he'd reserved at the local library, nervous energy radiating from him as neighbors filed in. Charlotte watched from the back, amazed at how many people had responded to the hastily made flyers they'd posted around the building. "Thanks for coming," Arthur began, his voice steadier than Charlotte expected. "I know we're all still processing Crane's announcement, but we can't just roll over and accept this." Mrs. Chen raised a trembling hand. "What can we do? They are big company. We are just people." Arthur stepped forward, his eyes bright with determination. "That's exactly why we need to stand together. Blackwood Properties might have money and lawyers, but we have community. We have history, and we have rights." Charlotte's chest tightened at the mention of her family name, spoken like a curse. Arthur outlined a three-part plan: researching tenant rights, contacting local housing advocates, and creating media attention. As he spoke, Charlotte saw his neighbors straightening in their chairs, nodding along, hope replacing resignation on their faces. "My daughter has only known one home," Arthur said, his voice catching slightly. "That's true for many of our kids. We're not just fighting for apartments, we're fighting for our community." The room erupted in applause. Charlotte found herself clapping too, her heart swelling with admiration and something deeper. This was a side of Arthur she hadn't seen before, a natural leader whose integrity and compassion inspired others. When the meeting broke into smaller groups, Charlotte approached Arthur tentatively. "I worked in real estate briefly," she said, the half-truth burning her tongue. "If you're challenging a development project, you should look into the permit applications. Sometimes there are procedural errors we could leverage." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "That's brilliant. Would you help with the research team?" Over the next week, they fell into a new rhythm. By day, Arthur worked his carpentry jobs while Charlotte dug through public records. Evenings found them side by side at his kitchen table, mapping strategies while Lily worked on homework nearby. One night, the apartment's ancient faucet began spraying water everywhere. Lily shrieked as Arthur rushed to the sink. "Hand me that wrench," he called to Charlotte, pointing to his toolbox. She fumbled through unfamiliar tools until finding it. "Now watch," he said, guiding her hand to hold the pipe steady while he worked. Sometimes the simplest fix makes all the difference. Charlotte felt the warmth of his calloused hands over hers, his breath on her neck as he leaned close to demonstrate. The simple intimacy of it made her pulse quicken. Later, she repaid his lesson by helping Lily with a challenging math assignment, showing her memory techniques that had the girl solving problems with newfound confidence. "Where did you learn that?" Arthur asked after Lily had gone to bed. Charlotte shrugged. "Private school. Sometimes the expensive education was actually useful." His smile made her stomach flip. "You're full of surprises, Charlotte." The next day, while photocopying flyers at the corner store, Charlotte felt a clammy hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Vernon Crane's smug face inches from hers. Well, he whispered. If it isn't Charlotte Blackwood playing homeless. Interesting hobby for a billionaire. Charlotte's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Save it. I recognized you from the charity gala last year. His grip tightened. Here's what happens now. You convince your carpenter boyfriend to take the relocation package, or I tell him exactly who's been sleeping under his roof. Charlotte pulled away, heart hammering. You're mistaken. Am I? Crane smirked. Your choice, Ms. Blackwood. His heart or his home? That afternoon, Charlotte and Arthur ventured out to post more flyers around the neighborhood. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and halfway through their route, rain began pouring down. Quick! Arthur grabbed her hand, pulling her under a nearby store awning. They pressed against the wall, laughing and breathless as rain pounded the sidewalk. Water dripped from Arthur's dark hair, and Charlotte reached up instinctively to brush it away. His eyes locked with hers, something unspoken passing between them. Charlotte, he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The world narrowed to just this moment, rain drumming above them, his warm palm against her skin. When his lips met hers, soft and questioning, Charlotte forgot everything else. Forgot Crane's threats, forgot her deception, forgot the impossible choice looming before her. She melted into the kiss, feeling as though she'd finally found home after a lifetime of searching. When they pulled apart, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. I wasn't planning that, he admitted with a shy smile. I'm glad you did, Charlotte whispered, knowing with terrible certainty that she'd found something precious, something that her own secrets threatened to destroy. The next morning, Charlotte slipped away while Arthur took Lily to school. She ducked into a coffee shop bathroom, changed into a tailored blazer and silk blouse from her emergency bag, and made a call on her secure phone. Javier? It's Charlotte. I need your help and your discretion. 3 hours later, she returned to the apartment building looking like herself again, only to change back into her thrift store clothes before Arthur returned from work. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded her expensive clothes away. The double life was becoming harder to maintain, especially now that her heart was involved. 2 days later, she casually mentioned to Arthur over dinner, I was thinking about what you said about needing legal help. I might know someone. We can't afford a decent lawyer, Arthur said, serving Lily another helping of the pasta Charlotte had made. This one's different. She worked pro bono for a shelter where I stayed once. She's brilliant with housing law. Arthur looked skeptical. And she'd help us for free. It's worth asking, Charlotte said, avoiding his eyes. The next afternoon, Javier Mendoza, one of the most expensive attorneys in the city and Charlotte's law school friend, arrived at the tenants' meeting in jeans and a casual button-down, looking nothing like the power lawyer whose face graced billboards downtown. Ms. Reynolds referred your case, he explained smoothly, using Charlotte's alias. I specialize in taking down predatory developers. This would be my pleasure. Arthur's face lit with cautious hope. We can't pay much pro bono, Javier insisted, winking subtly at Charlotte, who stood in the back of the room. Consider it my contribution to economic justice. Within a week, Javier had filed injunctions, discovered permit irregularities, and unearthed a pattern of tenant harassment that made local news. Charlotte had anonymously leaked key documents to journalists through untraceable channels, carefully protecting her involvement while using knowledge only someone in her position would have. The tide began to turn. The city council scheduled a special hearing. Blackwood Properties stock took a minor hit as the negative publicity spread. I can't believe our luck, Arthur said that evening as they sat on his small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Finding you, then finding Javier. It's like the universe finally decided to give us a break. Charlotte's stomach twisted with guilt. She opened her mouth to confess, the words forming on her lips. I'm not who you think I am. I'm Charlotte Blackwood, My family owns the company trying to evict you." But at that moment, Lily called from inside. "Dad, can you tuck me in?" "Be right there, sweetheart," Arthur called back. He squeezed Charlotte's hand. "Hold that thought." Charlotte followed him inside, hanging back in the doorway as Arthur sat on the edge of Lily's bed. The girl's room was small, but filled with drawings and small treasures. Pine cones, pretty rocks, a jar of seashells from a rare beach trip. "Can Charlotte read to me tonight?" Lily asked, her eyes hopeful. The request caught Charlotte off guard. "I'd love to," she said, moving to sit beside Arthur. After the story, when Lily was drifting off, Arthur gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders and kissed her forehead. The tenderness in the gesture made Charlotte's chest ache. This was what a real family looked like, not the cold, transactional relationships she'd grown up with. Back in the living room, Arthur sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by her," he confessed quietly. "After Sarah died, everything fell apart. The medical bills, losing the house. I keep thinking Sarah would have handled it all better." Charlotte sat beside him. "Lily is kind, smart, and feels secure enough to express her feelings. That's because of you, Arthur." "Sarah was the organized one," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She made everything work. Doctor's appointments, school projects, birthday parties. I'm just trying not to drop the balls she juggled so effortlessly." Charlotte took his hand. "You're not just keeping her alive, Arthur. She's thriving. I see it every day." Arthur looked at her, vulnerability naked in his eyes. "Having you here, it's the first time since Sarah that I've felt like I can breathe again. Like maybe I'm not failing at everything." Charlotte's confession died in her throat. How could she tell him now? How could she risk destroying this fragile piece he'd found? Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him softly, her secret a wall between them, even as their hearts drew closer. Next day, Vernon Crane paced outside the gleaming Blackwood Properties headquarters, his sweat-stained shirt clinging to his back despite the winter chill. When Philip Blackwood's sleek black car pulled up to the curb, Vernon straightened his posture and forced a confident smile. "This better be important," Philip said as he stepped out, not bothering with a greeting. His tailored suit and immaculate appearance made Vernon's rumpled clothing seem even shabbier. "It's about your cousin," Vernon said, following Philip into the building. "She's living with one of my tenants, the ringleader of this whole resistance movement." Philip stopped abruptly in the private elevator. "Charlotte? You're certain?" "Positive. She's calling herself Charlotte Reynolds, but it's her. She brought in that hotshot lawyer who's causing us so much trouble." Philip's jaw tightened. "The board meeting is in 3 weeks. If Charlotte returns with evidence of our creative accounting, everything falls apart." He studied Vernon with cold calculation. "This tenant, what's his name?" "Arthur Reed. Carpenter. Has a kid. And Charlotte is protecting him." Philip's mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Then perhaps Mr. Reed needs to learn that crossing Blackwood Properties has consequences." 2 nights later, Arthur was working late in his small workshop, a converted garage he rented a few blocks from his apartment. With the eviction threat looming, he'd taken on extra commissions, hoping to save enough for a security deposit on a new place if the worst happened. The music box for Lily's birthday sat on his workbench, nearly complete. He'd carved delicate roses along the sides, Sarah's favorite flower, and installed a mechanism that would play "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" when opened. Lily had been singing it constantly since Charlotte had shown her The Wizard of Oz. The thought of Charlotte brought a smile to his face. Whatever storm had blown her into his life, he couldn't imagine going back to the way things were before. The sound of breaking glass shattered his reverie. Arthur spun around as the workshop door burst open. 3 men in dark clothes and ski masks stormed in, baseball bats in hand. "What the hell?" Arthur backed up against his workbench. Take whatever money's in the register. There's not much." "This isn't a robbery," the tallest one said, swinging his bat into a shelf of wood finishes. Glass bottles crashed to the floor, chemicals splashing across completed projects. "It's a message. Stop making trouble." Understanding dawned. "Blackwood Properties sent you." The men didn't answer, instead systematically destroying the workshop. They toppled shelves, smashed tools, and splintered the furniture Arthur had spent weeks crafting for a restaurant downtown. Arthur stood frozen until one of them approached his workbench. "No!" Arthur lunged forward as the man raised his bat over Lily's music box. "Not that!" The bat came down, but Arthur managed to grab the music box, clutching it to his chest as he took the blow across his shoulders. Pain exploded through his back, but he curled protectively around the small wooden box. "Stubborn," one man muttered, swinging again. This time the bat caught Arthur on the side of his head. He crashed to the floor, still holding the music box as the room spun around him. Through blurring vision, he saw them continue their destruction, smashing everything he'd built. The last thing he heard before consciousness slipped away was the tinkling melody of the music box, somehow triggered in his fall. Charlotte found him an hour later when he missed their planned phone call. The workshop door hung from broken hinges, and the destruction inside made her gasp in horror. "Arthur!" She rushed to where he lay amid the wreckage, blood matting his hair. His fingers were still curled around the small wooden box. At the hospital, Charlotte paced the waiting room while doctors examined Arthur. When they finally allowed her to see him, the sight of his pale face against the white hospital sheets made her stomach clench with guilt. A bandage wrapped around his head, and bruises were beginning to darken along his jaw and arms. "Charlotte." Lily's small voice broke through her thoughts. The girl stood in the doorway with Mrs. Abernathy, their elderly neighbor who'd agreed to watch her. "Oh, sweetheart." Charlotte knelt down, opening her arms. Lily ran into them, her small body trembling. "Is Daddy going to die like Mommy did?" No, Charlotte assured her, stroking her hair. "The doctors say he has a concussion and some bruises, but he's going to be fine. He's strong, just like you." "Promise." Lily looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "I promise." Charlotte led her to the chair beside Arthur's bed. "See? He's just sleeping to help his body heal." Lily reached out tentatively to touch her father's hand. "He looks scary with those bruises." "I know, but underneath he's still your dad." Charlotte sat beside her, guilt gnawing at her insides. This was her fault, her company, her cousin, her deception that had put this family in danger. When Arthur stirred, opening his eyes groggily, Lily gasped. "Daddy." "Hey, lily pad," he mumbled, wincing as he tried to smile. Charlotte gently took his other hand, her throat tight with emotion. "Don't try to move too much. You took a bad hit to the head." "The music box?" he asked weakly. "It's safe," Charlotte assured him, nodding to where she'd placed it on the bedside table. "You protected it." Arthur's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Lily. It was supposed to be a surprise. "You saved it, Dad," Lily said, squeezing his hand. As Arthur drifted back to sleep, Charlotte sat holding his hand, Lily curled against her side. The weight of her deception pressed down on her like a physical burden. These people had become her family, and her secrets had put them in danger. She couldn't hide the truth any longer. The night stretched long in the hospital room. Charlotte maintained her vigil beside Arthur's bed, alternating between checking his monitors and soothing Lily, who had finally fallen asleep curled in a vinyl chair, her father's jacket draped over her like a blanket. A nurse entered with medication forms. "Mr. Reed needs to sign these for insurance processing." Charlotte scanned the documents with practiced ease. "There's an error in the coverage code. This should be listed under emergency trauma, not general admission." The nurse blinked in surprise. "You're right. I'll have this corrected." "Arthur," who had been drifting in and out of consciousness, watched through half-closed eyes as Charlotte expertly navigated the paperwork, speaking in terms he barely understood about deductibles and coverage limitations. "How do you know all that?" he asked when the nurse left. Charlotte startled, not realizing he was awake. I used to work in administration." "At a homeless shelter?" His voice held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. She looked away, fidgeting with the edge of his blanket. "Something like that." When the doctor arrived later to discuss Arthur's release, Charlotte again displayed unexpected knowledge, asking detailed questions about follow-up care and recovery protocols. "You're fortunate to have such a knowledgeable advocate, Mr. Reed," the doctor commented before leaving. Arthur's gaze lingered on Charlotte's face. "The guys who did this, they knew exactly where to hit me. Said it was a message to stop making trouble." Charlotte's hands trembled as she poured him water. "Arthur, how would they know about the tenant organizing unless someone told them?" His eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "You've been acting strange ever since I mentioned Blackwood Properties." The weight of her secret pressed down on Charlotte's chest, making it hard to breathe. She glanced at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the conversation that would change everything. "I need to tell you something," Charlotte whispered, her voice breaking. "But I'm terrified of what happens after I do." The hospital room fell silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Outside, night had fully descended, casting shadows across Arthur's bruised face. "Just tell me the truth," he said finally. Charlotte took a deep breath. "My name is Charlotte Blackwood. I'm the majority shareholder and heir to Blackwood Properties." Arthur stared at her, disbelief etching across his features. "What?" "I've been living undercover for months," she continued, words tumbling out. "After discovering corruption in my company, schemes I never approved, I needed to understand what was happening at ground level. I wanted real connections, not people who only saw my wealth." Arthur's expression hardened. "So I was what? A social experiment? Some poverty tourism?" "No, it became real, Arthur." Charlotte reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "What I feel for you and Lily is the most genuine thing in my life. The eviction notices, the rent increases, that was your company." His voice rose, causing Lily to stir in her sleep. Charlotte nodded miserably. "My cousin Philip has been running operations in my absence. Vernon works for him. I didn't know about your building until it was too late. And the attack on my shop. That was Vernon. He recognized me and threatened to expose me unless I convinced you to stop organizing." Tears streamed down her face. "I refused, and this is how he retaliated. I'm so sorry, Arthur. This is all my fault." Arthur closed his eyes, his jaw clenched tight. When he opened them again, they were cold with anger. "Everything between us was built on a lie," he said, each word deliberate and cutting. "You watched me struggle, worry about money, stress over Lily's future, all while sitting on billions. I wanted to help without revealing that you're the very thing we've been fighting against." Arthur interrupted. "You let me pour my heart out to you. You let Lily grow attached to you." "I love you both," Charlotte whispered desperately. "Love doesn't lie like this." Arthur turned his face away. "When I'm discharged tomorrow, I want you gone." "Arthur, please." "Daddy?" Lily's sleepy voice interrupted them. She rubbed her eyes, looking between the adults with confusion. "Why are you yelling? Why is Charlotte crying?" Charlotte wiped her tears, trying to smile for Lily's sake. "Everything's okay, sweetheart. Your dad just needs rest." "Will you still be here tomorrow?" Lily asked, reaching for Charlotte's hand. Before Charlotte could answer, Arthur spoke, his voice firm despite his injuries. "Charlotte has to leave Lily. She has other responsibilities." "But she can come back, right?" Lily's eyes widened with alarm. "She's part of our family now." The word family broke something in Charlotte. She choked back a sob as Arthur answered. No, Lilypad, she's not coming back. Lily's face crumpled in confusion and hurt. But why? What happened? Charlotte knelt beside Lily's chair, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving this child she'd grown to love. Sometimes adults have complicated reasons for the decisions they make. But I want you to know that meeting you was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I don't understand, Lily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I know, Charlotte said softly. And I'm so sorry. She stood gathering her few belongings, feeling Arthur's cold gaze on her back. At the door, she turned one last time. I never meant to hurt either of you, she said. That's the truth, even if you can't believe anything else about me. Then she was gone, leaving behind the only real family she'd known in years. Next morning, Charlotte stood in the lobby of Blackwood Properties, her heart pounding beneath her simple blouse and jeans. The gleaming marble and sleek glass that had once felt like home now seemed cold and foreign. 3 months of living Arthur's reality had changed her perspective forever. Ms. Blackwood, the receptionist's eyes widened in shock. We weren't expecting you. That's rather the point, Charlotte replied, striding toward the elevator. Her security badge still worked. Small mercies. As the elevator climbed toward the executive floor, Charlotte steeled herself. She would stop the evictions, reform the company, and maybe, somehow, find a way to make amends to Arthur and Lily. The thought of Lily's tear-stained face as she left the hospital made her stomach clench. The doors opened directly into the executive suite. Her cousin Philip sat behind her desk, Vernon Crane lounging in a chair opposite him. Both men froze at her appearance. Charlotte, Philip recovered quickly, his smile not reaching his eyes. What a surprise. We thought you were still on your sabbatical. It's over, Charlotte said flatly. I'm back, and I've learned some disturbing things about how this company operates. Vernon shifted uncomfortably, but Philip maintained his composure. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No need. Charlotte placed her hands on the desk. Her desk. I'm stopping the development project in Arthur Reed's neighborhood, immediately. And we're going to review every similar project for ethical concerns. Philip laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. That's not possible. The contracts are signed. The investors are committed. I'm the majority shareholder. I can make it possible. About that, Philip slid a folder across the desk. You might want to review these documents. Charlotte opened the folder, scanning the contents with growing horror. Transfer of ownership papers with her signature, forged but convincingly dated during her absence. What is this? She demanded. Insurance, Philip replied smoothly. Your extended absence raised concerns about your mental stability. The board agreed temporary measures were necessary. This is fraud, Charlotte said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And you, she turned to Vernon. You attacked a man, destroyed his livelihood. Vernon shrugged. Business is business, nothing personal. It was personal to Arthur Reed and his daughter, Charlotte snapped. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling my lawyer. Philip nodded slightly to Vernon, who moved to block the door. I'm afraid we can't let you do that, cousin. Not until we come to an understanding. Charlotte backed away, suddenly aware of the danger. The board will never support this. The board believes you're having a breakdown, Philip replied. And after your unfortunate accident today, they'll have no choice but to make the temporary arrangement permanent. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Accident? Tragic, really. Overwhelmed by stress, you fell from the rooftop garden. Philip's eyes were dead, emotionless. Vernon, please escort my cousin to the roof. We need some privacy for our final conversation. Charlotte glanced around desperately, then lunged for the desk, grabbing the folder of fraudulent documents. She bolted for the private bathroom, locking the door behind her as Vernon pounded against it. With shaking hands, she photographed every document, sending them to her personal email and her lawyer. Then she climbed onto the marble counter and pushed open the small window. Her secret smoking escape from years ago. She squeezed through just as the bathroom door splintered open, dropping 10 feet to a maintenance platform below. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline pushed her forward as she hobbled toward the fire escape. Miles away, Arthur sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills. His bandaged hands throbbed, a constant reminder of the attack and of Charlotte's betrayal. "Daddy?" Lily stood in the doorway, clutching the stuffed rabbit Charlotte had fixed for her. "When is Charlotte coming back?" Arthur sighed, his heart breaking at his daughter's hopeful expression. It was the 5th time she'd asked today. "She's not, Lily Pad. I told you that." "But why?" Lily's lower lip trembled. "Did she stop loving us?" Arthur rubbed his face wearily. "It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain." Lily's voice carried a hurt beyond her years. "She made you smile again. She helped me with my math. She made us a family." Arthur watched as his daughter trudged back to her room, shoulders slumped. The apartment felt emptier than ever without Charlotte's presence, without her laughter, her terrible jokes, the way she hummed while cooking. Had he overreacted? The question nagged at him. Yes, she had lied about her identity, but not about her feelings. He remembered the terror in her eyes when he'd been injured, the gentle way she'd cared for Lily. His neighbor Maria knocked on the open door. "How are you holding up?" "We're managing," Arthur said automatically. "And Charlotte?" "I haven't seen her around." Arthur stared at his bandaged hands. "She's gone." "That's a shame. She was really fighting for us, you know. Found us that lawyer, organized the petition." Maria paused. "Lily must miss her." "We both do," Arthur admitted quietly, the words surprising him with their truth. After Maria left, Arthur limped to Lily's room. She lay on her bed, surrounded by drawings, all featuring Charlotte. "I made these for when she comes back," Lily explained, her voice small but determined. Looking at his daughter's unwavering faith, Arthur felt his pride crumble. Maybe Charlotte had lied about who she was, but she'd never lied about loving them. And he had sent her away without giving her a chance to make things right. "I think I made a mistake, Lily," he whispered. One afternoon, Charlotte stood in the shadows across from Arthur's apartment building, clutching the folder of evidence against her chest. Rain plastered her hair to her face, her designer clothes replaced by a simple hoodie and jeans. Her ankle throbbed from her desperate escape earlier that day. She had nowhere else to go. Her accounts were frozen, her home compromised, and her life in danger. Through the window, she could see Arthur at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers, his bandaged hands struggling with a pencil. The sight of him made her heart ache. She'd never meant to hurt him. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte crossed the street and entered the building. Each step up the stairs sent pain shooting through her injured ankle. When she reached his door, she hesitated before knocking softly. The door swung open. Arthur's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed. Charlotte. Her name sounded flat on his lips. "I'm sorry to come here," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." He noticed her limping, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. Despite his anger, concern flickered across his face. "What happened to you?" "My cousin tried to kill me." She held up the folder. "I have proof of what they've been doing, not just here but across the city. Fraud, intimidation, violence. I need your help." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Why should I help you?" "You shouldn't," Charlotte admitted. "I lied to you, and I'm sorry. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about stopping them before they hurt anyone else. Before they hurt you and Lily again." Before Arthur could respond, a small voice cried out from behind him. "Charlotte!" Lily burst past her father and threw her arms around Charlotte's waist. "You came back!" Charlotte knelt despite her pain, hugging Lily tightly. "I missed you so much." Arthur watched them, his expression conflicted. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in. You can explain everything." Inside, Charlotte laid out the documents on the kitchen table. Property transfers, falsified board minutes, records of bribes. As she explained the conspiracy, Arthur's carpentry skills proved unexpectedly useful in organizing the complex paper trail. "These dates don't match," he said, pointing to a document. "This was signed the day you were helping me fix Mrs. Gonzalez's cabinet." "Exactly. They forged my signature while I was here." Charlotte winced as she shifted her weight. "There's more evidence out there. Other tenants must have received similar threats. Former employees might know about other properties." Arthur sighed, rubbing his temple. "I'll help you gather evidence for the neighborhood, but that doesn't mean I trust you again." Charlotte nodded, accepting his terms. "Thank you." Over the next 2 days, they worked side by side, collecting testimonies from neighbors and tracking down former Blackwood employees. Though Arthur maintained his emotional distance, Lily's joy at Charlotte's return gradually softened the atmosphere between them. "Daddy," Lily said one evening as Arthur tucked her in. Charlotte said she was sorry. Mom always said forgiveness is important. Arthur smoothed her hair. "It's not that simple, Lily Pad." "Why not? Don't you miss her pancakes? And the way she laughs at your jokes even when they're not funny?" Arthur couldn't help smiling. "Get some sleep." But that night, Lily woke with a burning fever. Her small body shook with chills as Arthur held her, panic rising in his chest. "We should take her to the hospital," Charlotte said, already grabbing her coat. "No hospitals," Lily whimpered. "Please, Daddy." They compromised on calling a doctor who prescribed medication and advised them to monitor her through the night. As Arthur went to fill the prescription, Charlotte sat beside Lily's bed, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth. "Don't leave again," Lily murmured deliriously. "I won't," Charlotte promised, her heart breaking. When Arthur returned, he found Charlotte singing softly, stroking Lily's hair as the child finally drifted to sleep. The melody stopped him in his tracks. A lullaby his wife had sung, one he'd never taught Charlotte. "How do you know that song?" he whispered. Charlotte looked up, surprised. "My mother used to sing it to me. It was the only thing that helped when I was sick." Arthur sank into the chair beside her, the coincidence cracking something open inside him. They kept vigil together through the night, taking turns applying cool compresses and administering medicine. As dawn broke, Lily's fever finally receded. Exhausted, they sat in the kitchen, nursing cups of coffee. "Thank you," Arthur said quietly, "for staying, for caring for her." Charlotte met his eyes. "I love her. I love both of you." Arthur stared into his cup. "When you left, or when I made you leave, this place stopped feeling like home." He looked up, his eyes vulnerable. "I miss what we were becoming, the three of us." Charlotte reached across the table, her fingers hovering near his bandaged hand. "I miss it too." Slowly, Arthur turned his palm upward, allowing her fingers to rest against his, the first step toward rebuilding what they'd lost. As the days passed, Arthur and Charlotte worked tirelessly to build their case against Philip. Their makeshift investigation headquarters, Arthur's kitchen table, became covered with documents, photographs, and witness statements. Though the work was intense, it created a space where their relationship could slowly heal. One night, as they sorted through financial records, Arthur noticed Charlotte's handwriting on a note. "Your penmanship is beautiful," he said, breaking the silence. Charlotte looked up, surprised by the compliment. "My mother insisted on it, said a Blackwood should have handwriting as elegant as their name. Lily struggles with hers. Her teacher says she rushes too much." "I could help her practice," Charlotte offered hesitantly, unsure if she was overstepping. Arthur nodded. She'd like that. These small exchanges began to rebuild the bridge between them, tentative at first, then stronger with each passing day. Late one night, Lily's scream pierced the darkness. Arthur rushed to her room with Charlotte close behind. Lily was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "The bad men were back," she sobbed, referring to the thugs who had attacked her father's workshop. Arthur sat on the edge of her bed, but to his surprise, Lily reached for Charlotte. Without hesitation, Charlotte gathered the child in her arms. "They can't hurt you," she whispered, rocking Lily gently. "Your dad and I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." Over Lily's head, her eyes met Arthur's. The promise in her words extended to him too, a vow to protect what was precious to them both. The next day, Mrs. Gonzalez from down the hall stopped by with a casserole. When she spotted Charlotte, her expression cooled. "So she's back," she said to Arthur, "after all her lies." "Charlotte is helping us save our homes," Arthur replied firmly. "And she's welcome in mine." Charlotte, arranging documents at the table, looked up with gratitude shining in her eyes. Arthur's defense meant more than he could know. That evening, as they reviewed tenant testimonies, their hands brushed while reaching for the same paper. Neither pulled away immediately. The contact lingered, a silent acknowledgement of what was rebuilding between them. "I think we have enough," Charlotte finally said, gathering the most damning evidence into a folder. "The board meeting is tomorrow. We need to present this directly to them." Arthur nodded. "I'll be right beside you." The Blackwood headquarters loomed above them, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reflected the morning sun. Charlotte straightened her shoulders as they walked through the lobby, nodding at security guards who did double takes at seeing the heiress they'd thought missing. "The boardroom is on the top floor," she said, pressing the elevator button. As the doors were about to close, a hand shot between them. Philip stepped in, his surprise quickly masked by a cold smile. "Cousin, how unexpected. And with company." His eyes flicked dismissively over Arthur. "We're here for the board meeting," Charlotte said evenly. "Of course you are." Philip's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I'm afraid there's been a change of venue." He pressed a different button, and the elevator descended instead of rising. "What are you doing?" Charlotte demanded. "Protecting what's mine." Philip drew a small pistol from his jacket. "I've worked too hard to let you ruin everything." The elevator stopped at a sub-basement level. Philip forced them down a corridor into a maintenance room filled with cleaning supplies and old equipment. "You've always had everything handed to you," he spat at Charlotte as he took their phones. "The title, the company, our grandfather's approval. I had to fight for every scrap of recognition." "This isn't about recognition," Charlotte replied. "It's about what's right. People's homes, their lives." "Spare me your newfound social conscience." Philip grabbed the folder of evidence. "After I'm done here, the board will hear about your tragic accident." He backed toward the door, knocking over containers of cleaning chemicals as he went. With a final hateful glance, he flicked a lighter and tossed it into the spilled liquid before slamming the door. Flames erupted instantly, racing across the floor. Arthur lunged for the door, but it was locked from the outside. "There's no way out," Charlotte coughed as smoke began to fill the room. Arthur pulled his shirt over his mouth, scanning for escape routes. "There has to be." As the fire spread, they retreated to the far corner, the heat intensifying around them. "Arthur," Charlotte said, gripping his hands, "if we don't make it out of here, I need you to know I love you. Not because you took me in when I had nothing, but because you showed me what it means to live with integrity." Arthur pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, the real you, not the heiress, not the homeless woman. Just you." Their lips met in a desperate kiss, a declaration of everything they might lose. When they pulled apart, Arthur's expression had changed from despair to determination. "We're not dying here," Lily needs us. Both of us. Together, they searched the smoke-filled room until Charlotte spotted a maintenance duct near the ceiling. Working as one, they stacked boxes and equipment, creating a precarious ladder. Arthur boosted Charlotte up first, then climbed after her as the flames licked at his heels. The narrow duct led them to a utility corridor and finally to a service exit. They burst outside, gasping for fresh air, the precious folder of evidence still clutched in Arthur's hand. "We made it," Charlotte breathed, looking at Arthur with newfound wonder. Their ordeal had burned away the last of their doubts, forging something unbreakable between them. Few days after the incident, the boardroom fell silent as Charlotte finished presenting the evidence. Documents spread across the polished table showed years of fraudulent dealings, forged signatures, and the systematic exploitation of vulnerable communities, all bearing Philip's fingerprints. "As you can see," Charlotte concluded, her voice steady despite her smoke-stained clothes, "my cousin has betrayed not only me, but the ethical foundation this company was built upon." The board members exchanged troubled glances. Arthur stood quietly behind Charlotte, his presence lending her strength. His carpenter's hands, calloused and honest, contrasted with the manicured fingers of the executives examining the evidence. "Mr. Blackwood," the board chairman addressed Philip, who sat rigid with fury, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Philip's composure finally cracked. "She abandoned her responsibilities. I kept this company profitable while she played homeless." "By destroying people's homes?" Charlotte countered. "By attacking an innocent man's livelihood?" Security escorted Philip and Vernon from the building within the hour. As they were led away, Philip hissed at Charlotte, "You've gone soft. This company will collapse under your bleeding heart." Charlotte watched him go, then turned to the board. "Blackwood Properties needs restructuring. Our first priority will be developing affordable housing initiatives, starting with the West Side apartments." "That project is already underway," one director objected. "Contracts have been signed." "Then we'll sign new ones," Charlotte replied firmly. "We have the resources to both maintain profitability and operate ethically. I'll show you how." 3 weeks later, the West Side neighborhood erupted in celebration. Colorful banners hung between buildings, and tables laden with potluck dishes lined the courtyard. Children darted between adults, their laughter a soundtrack to victory. Charlotte stood slightly apart, watching Arthur accept congratulations from his neighbors. His arm was around Lily, who clutched a handmade thank you card for Miss Charlotte. The sight warmed her heart, even as uncertainty clouded her thoughts. Mrs. Guzman, the elderly tenant from 3B, approached Charlotte with a plate of empanadas. "You saved our homes, dear. You're a hero." Charlotte shook her head. "Arthur is the hero. He stood up first. He gave us courage. You gave us a chance," Mrs. Guzman replied. "Why are you standing over here alone when your family is over there?" Family. The word echoed in Charlotte's mind as Mrs. Guzman wandered off. Were they her family? In the fire, facing death, declarations had come easily. But now, in the light of day, Charlotte hesitated. Arthur deserved to choose their relationship freely, not from gratitude or obligation. Across the courtyard, Arthur watched Charlotte keeping her distance. He understood her hesitation. It mirrored his own. The past month had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, company restructuring, and community organizing. Through it all, Charlotte had proven herself not just with words, but actions. He excused himself from his neighbors and crossed to where she stood. "You should be celebrating," he said. "You're the reason everyone still has a home." Charlotte smiled softly. "We did it together." A comfortable silence settled between them before Arthur spoke again. "I went by my workshop yesterday. Someone replaced all my tools. Better quality than I ever owned before." Charlotte looked away. "The insurance settlement." "We both know insurance doesn't work that fast," Arthur interrupted gently. "Or that generously." You needed your livelihood back, she said simply. Arthur took her hand, turning it over in his. You know what the most valuable thing you've given us isn't the tools or saving our home. Charlotte met his eyes questioningly. It's this, he said, gesturing to Lily, who was teaching younger children a clapping game, her face alight with happiness. Before you came, we were surviving, not living. You brought laughter back into our lives. Charlotte's eyes glistened. I never meant to deceive you. I was afraid. I know that now, Arthur said. You were looking for something real in a world of pretense. So was I. Still, they stood at the threshold of something neither quite knew how to cross. Charlotte, who could now restructure a multi-billion-dollar corporation, found herself wordless before the simplest question. Where did they go from here? Your world and mine, Arthur began hesitantly. They're so different. Are they? Charlotte challenged softly. We both want honesty, purpose, a chance to build something meaningful. She paused. A home that's more than just walls. Lily bounded over, breaking the tension. Mrs. Guzman says to stop being silly adults and come eat before the food gets cold. Arthur laughed, the sound releasing some of the uncertainty between them. He didn't let go of Charlotte's hand as they walked toward the celebration. The question of their future still unresolved, but the path forward a little clearer. That evening, as the neighborhood celebration wound down, Charlotte watched Arthur and Lily returning to their apartment. She followed at a distance, uncertain whether to join them or return to her penthouse across town. Her company was stabilized, the neighborhood saved, but her heart remained in limbo. You're not coming up, Lily called when she noticed Charlotte hesitating at the building entrance. Charlotte smiled gently. I thought you and your dad might want some time together. But you're part of our time now, Lily insisted with a child's simple logic. Arthur met Charlotte's eyes over his daughter's head. She's right. Come up for a while. Over the next few days, Charlotte divided her time between rebuilding Blackwood properties and evenings with Arthur and Lily. She established a foundation dedicated to affordable housing initiatives, pouring her energy into making amends for her company's past actions. Though she and Arthur shared tender moments, hands brushing while washing dishes, quiet conversations after Lily went to bed, Charlotte sensed his hesitation. You need space, she told him one evening as they sat on his small balcony. Time to decide what you truly want, without pressure. Before Arthur could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. I made something at school today, she announced, handing them each a handwritten invitation. It's for tomorrow night. The cards read, Family dinner at 6 o'clock. Dress nice. Love, Lily. Family dinner? Arthur questioned. Lily nodded solemnly. I'm cooking. Well, Mrs. Guzman is helping, but it's my idea. The following evening, Charlotte arrived to find the apartment transformed. Lily had arranged flowers in a mason jar, set the table with their best mismatched dishes, and hung paper decorations around the room. Mrs. Guzman discreetly slipped out as Charlotte entered, winking conspiratorially. During their meal of slightly overcooked pasta, Lily grew unusually philosophical. My teacher asked us what home means, she said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Johnny said it's having your own room, and Maya said it's where your stuff is. What did you say, sweetheart? Arthur asked. I said home isn't about having stuff. It's about being with people who really see you. Lily looked between them meaningfully. Like we see each other. Charlotte's eyes met Arthur's across the table, both recognizing the wisdom in the child's words. After dinner, while Lily was in the bath, Arthur led Charlotte to the balcony. Outside, storm clouds gathered, eerily similar to the night they'd first met. Do you remember? He asked softly. How could I forget? Charlotte smiled. I was huddled in your doorway, and you offered shelter to a stranger. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Arthur took her hands. Charlotte, don't leave us. These past months, you've transformed our lives, not with your money or your influence, but with you. My world is complicated, she warned, though her heart raced with hope. So is everyone's, Arthur replied. But I've never felt at home anywhere the way I do when you're with us. The first raindrops fell as Charlotte made her choice. Love over wealth and status, authentic connection over corporate power. Their kiss, backlit by lightning, sealed a promise neither had expected to make when they'd first met in that same stormy doorway. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.